Today, we're gathered here to read the 151 names on our wall. The wall behind me, if you remember, had 146 names. It's now, we're proud to say, 151. We want to make sure that we recognize every single person that has lost their lives for the freedom of this country. The names behind me represent people from World War I, World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, and most recently, the Afghanistan and Iraqi wars. The names that we have added to the wall represent those individuals as well as the original 146 names. The names added to the wall are Thomas Beacom, a Walteria resident who was on board of the submarine USS Aeronaut when it was attacked and sunk. All hands were lost that January 10th, 1943. James D. Sanders, also from Walteria. He enlisted and died at the very young age of 17 when the escort aircraft carrier USS Liscombe Bay was torpedoed and sunk in November 1943. Russell Browning, merchant mariner who was aboard the USS Azalea when it was torpedoed and sunk by a U-boat in February 1942. Krista Palaka, a local baseball player and Army infantryman who was killed on Luzon by a blast injury from artillery in May 1945. John Wolverton, naval aviator whose plane went missing on May 15th of 1943 on a routine search mission from Guadalcanal. We're here gathered to remember them and all who served, sacrificed their lives, those that were left behind, and those today that carry on for this country. We'll never forget and will always remember those who have fought for our freedom as we give thanks to those, and again, those that continue to serve. This year, several of our readers, are fellow veterans, reading every name individually. As you hear their names read, be remembering them through the pause. Give them thanks and pay tribute to them for all of their individual sacrifices. I'd like to ask you to stand as our former Mayor Frank Scotto leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First reader, please approach the podium.
Luis Alvarez. Joseph Anzac Jr. Bernard Bailey. Olin Barkdal. Thomas Beecham. Rudolph Baranek. Rudolph Bernasconi. Arnold Bleached Furnich. Ralph Breedfield, Kenneth Brooks, Clint Brown, Russell Browning, Claude Bruce, Gary Brune, Bryson Burkholder, James Brine, Archie Caraway, Paul Carter, Michael Carter, Thomas Carter, Dario Chavez, Ernest Colburn,
George Colburn, Morrison Cotner, Donald Craw, Douglas Crawford, Ricardo Crocker, Bert Crossland, Raymond Cruz, Leon Culverhouse, Dan Cunningham, James Daniel, Francis Dietland, Thomas Dilchrist, Michael Dixon, Robert Dodson, Michael Duarte, Bobby Edwards, Charles Eisenacher, Edward Ernst, George Escobar, Anthony Eversole.
Matthew Ferrara, John Fess Jr., Nestor Flores, John Foley, John Foster, Perry Franklin, Micah Gifford, Stephen Grant, Carrie Grubbs, Jose Gutierrez, Chelsea Hamilton, Tomet Hazlitt, Robert Hatter, Isaac Heath, James Hurlett, Alan Hill, John Hill, Ernest Hill, Jr., George Isbell, Jesse Johnson, Frank Jones, Herman Jones, James Juge, Mark Juge, Torrance Candler, Michael Kessel, Bryce Kendrick, William Kilpatrick, Lupe Lara, Stephen Lewis, Anthony Lugo, Louis Madore, Eugene Markwell, Thomas Martin, Wallace Matioshi, Danny McMinn, Reuben Merkel, James Mitchell, Garland Moody, Joseph Mullen, Larry Munez, Forrest Muchler, John Nestor.
James Newton, Robert Noble, William Nunn, Richard O'Brien, Vladimir Obedine, Christy Palika, Arthur Parker, Raymond Pennington, Milo Plunkett, Theron Price, Thomas Price, James Proughton, Fred Quagan, Floyd Ramsey, Paul Ratliff, John Reynolds, Robert Richardson, Everett Reichert, Larry Robillard, Tony Roomsburg, James D. Sanders, Paul Sanderson.
Warren Sapp, Clarence Schiebler, William Schoolcraft. Robert Searle. Eugene Shanner. Ikara Samatsu. Gregory Simonian. William Sleeth. Addison Smith. Christopher Smith. Edgar Smith. Francis Snay. Robert Stambrook. Alex Stewart. William Stewart. Gregory Stone. Eugene Stryker. Rodney Stowbridge.
Gary Purcell, Osamu Tamuda, Ted Tanoe, Yukio Tanoe, William Torrance, Richard Thayer, Royce Tidwell, Frederick Tiffany, Kenneth Tudor, Leonard Voorhees.
George Walker. Ronald Wambach. Richard Washer. Earl Watson. Frank Webster. Norman Wenzel. Walter West. Theodore Weymouth. Ivan Wilcox. Larry Williams. Thomas Williams. Walter Weasel. John Wolverton. Brian Wood. Charles Works. Thomas Wright.
In honor of all of our heroes on the wall behind me, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence. Thank you. As we conclude, and thank you for joining us in Torrance's annual reading of the names on the wall, we want to remind you that the research continues. Torrance is a city that never forgets. They never forget those that have paid the ultimate sacrifice for us and our country. With a little more than halfway, we have complete stories on the names of the wall behind me. We'd like to have a story and a face for every one of those names. So if you heard a familiar name, please reach out to the Torrance Historical Society and share that story or that history so we can share with others. It's through this continued research that we were able to, with a handful of volunteers, remember, thank, and pay tribute to the 5 additional names that we have added to the 146 on the wall. It is with thanks to those volunteers and the city, we can now, every day, come to this wall and say thank you. But most importantly, on Memorial Day, where we continue to thank all of those that are continuing to fight for the freedom of the world. So in conclusion, I say remember that every day is Memorial Day, not just today, because our fallen heroes and their sacrifices can never be forgotten. Thank you for joining us.